right, Joey, the guy that never loses, never a customer or nor an employee. You wrote a couple of books that are very, very interesting. Your latest is Never Lose an Employee Again. Fantastic book. Can really recommend it. Joey, good to have you on.
Armin, it's an absolute pleasure to be here. Thanks so much for the invitation and the kind words about my books. I really appreciate that. And thanks to everybody who's listening in or watching along. I'm really looking forward to our conversation today.
Oh, yeah, for sure. I'm looking forward to a long time for this because, like, ever since I read your first book, which was Never Lose a Customer Again, I think like my thinking shifted very much to seeing, each step of our client journey as separate and as important, and that is we are continuously need to improve, and also putting us in the shoes of our client on a constant basis at every step. And for some reason, and like, you're going to tell me like why this is the case. Like a lot of companies don't think that way, right? So,
They don't.
and like, so maybe like before we kind of, go in some of the details in the methodology and other things, how did you kind of recognize there's such a need for, looking at it that way?
Well, I think I mean, you asked this question, Armin, why don't companies do this? I think there's a couple reasons they don't do it. And that's actually what sparked my interest in this. Number one, most organizations do this when they first start. When it's a solo entrepreneur starting the business, maybe one or two people, they really care about their clients. They really care about their employees. Why? Because they only have one or two. It's easy. The problem is, as we start to scale, things start to fall through the cracks. We don't have that same personal and emotional connection. We don't have that same commitment. We get to the point with our clients where we may have grown our team that we don't even know every client that we're serving. As we think about our employees or our team members, we grow to a size where we weren't involved in the hiring of everybody on the team. We don't even know kind of what their backgrounds or their roles are. And so I think part of the reason why people don't put themselves in the shoes of others is because they grow so fast, the organization gets so big, the disconnect increases, and it can be challenging. It can be challenging to step out of our own worldview and try to understand another person's perspective. I think empathy is a hugely important and powerful tool, but it's something that most of us don't spend a lot of time practicing.
And that's so interesting because you said, well, you can't create a great customer experience without a great employee experience, which makes a lot of sense, especially when we talk, when you just mentioned the word scaling, where it really goes like client relationships go beyond the founder and so on and so forth. So, what's really kind of the link there? Because on the one hand, you could say, well, can we systematize it? Right. So it might not be, the customer experience might be not fully attached to the employee. On the other hand, that's probably not the case, especially if you think about B2B high ticket services. So could you like elaborate a little bit on this? So how do you think about it?
Well, I think of all interactions not as B2B or B2C or B2G, but rather H to H. It's humans to
Mm.
humans. And so I think you can systematize some of these operations. I think you can automate some of them, but you can't let your systemization and your automation detract from your humanity. You still need to be finding ways to make the interactions personal and emotional. Now, what I think is interesting about those two words, Armin, is personal means it's relevant to me. Emotional means I have an emotional reaction to it. Now,
Right.
if you were to ask me about what it's like to grow up in a large family, I grew up in a family of seven. My answer is both personal and emotional. But if you were asked me, well, what's it like to be an only child? Well, I don't have any personal connection to it, but I have some emotional thoughts about it that are influenced by growing up in a big family. So the secret, I think, is when we can have conversations with the people we interact with, whether those are our customers or our employees, that are both personal and emotional. And that's the opportunity, I think, for us to be looking for in our organizations is where is the opportunity for a personal touch point? Where is the opportunity for an emotional touch point? And if we can combine the personal and emotional touch point, that leads to good things.
And that makes a lot of sense. And in your new book, you mentioned a couple of statistics why this is true. So, like, why should we really care? So, the logic that you just mentioned makes total sense. So, is there any kind of, evidence, hard evidence, since, like, some, that that would point to, wow, you really need to pay attention to this?
Well, I think the hard evidence can most easily be found in the volume of employee turnover and the financial impact of employee turnover. There's a number of pieces of data and evidence we can look to, but let's just look at those two for purposes of our conversation here.
Sure.
Number one, 40% of newly hired employees, 40%, 40, will not be with the organization at their 1 year anniversary. 40% of new hires quit before the 1 year anniversary.
That's US
20,
data, right?
that's global.
It's global. Okay.
Global data. 40%. Okay. So this is a huge number of people that are starting working somewhere and quitting. Now, let's give you some US data on the financials. The cost of that quitting in the United States alone is $700 billion annually. $700 billion annually, the cost of employee turnover. Now, what we see is more and more employees in today's market are quitting and thinking about leaving. Let's look at the thinking about leaving. 65% of Americans currently employed are thinking about quitting and going to a different job. Some people say, well, it's tough in America. Yeah. Well, it's in the high 50s in Japan. It's in the 60s in most countries in Europe, right? I think it's last data I saw was mid 50s in Australia. The numbers are high globally in terms of employees thinking there might be a better opportunity somewhere else. And part of it's very easy to quit a company. It's very hard to quit a friendship. And if you are friends with your coworkers, if you are friends with your boss, if you are connected in a personal and emotional way, that's what I mean by being friends, right? You have a personal and emotional connection. It's a lot harder to quit.
Yeah, yeah. Maybe that's the reason why Elon Musk is sleeping in the office as well, to a certain extent.
We can have a whole separate conversation about that. Some of the ways he interacts with his team. Let's just say it's interesting how easy it was for him to attract talent in the beginning, and how hard it's gotten since then, based on the employee experience within the companies.
Interesting. And now let's say, let's imagine, you're talking to many companies, to many, CEOs. So now let's say I'm an investor, I'm a CEO, have a couple of portfolio companies or departments. And like, first of all, I think, like, how do I actually assess that I have room for improvement? Right. So we looked at we talked about the turnover numbers. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. But like, when you go into a company, like, how do you make sense of it? Like, what's the the process? Maybe you can go into some aspects in the book, or walk us maybe like through the usual discovery process of to make sense of, oh, okay, is this company, like, on the scale from 1 to 10, how is this company doing?
Yeah, one of my favorite things to start with, Armin, in terms of a discovery process with my consulting clients, or if I'm leading a workshop,
Sure.
is to create a map of the employee journey. Let's map from the first time an employee hears about our organization, whether it's a job posting, a career listing, or they just say, that seems like an interesting company, I want to go
And
work
how many
for.
companies have that in place, actually? Or do you probably have to do it from scratch?
Yeah, we do it from scratch. What we do is we bring people from the entire organization into the room. My request for all of my consulting clients is I want a representative from every level and every department of the organization in the room for the day. That's the requirement of doing work with me as a consultant. We bring everybody in. If you want to bring more than one from each role, that's great. Have as many in the room as you want. And we map out the whole journey from there up until the 8th phase in the employee journey, the advocate phase, where you have a raving fan singing your praises far and wide. So this is an employee who's writing reviews on Glassdoor. When you have a position open in your company, they're referring the smartest people they ever worked with and getting them to submit their resumes to be considered for the role. That's the advocate, right? That's where we're going to.
Right.
And we map out this entire journey. And what I will tell you, Armin, is having done this on all 7 continents with thousands of different organizations, what we have found is that I have never had an instance where one person could map the entire journey from beginning to end and tell me all the touch points.
Not even the HR department. Well, the HR
Not even.
departments are questionable nowadays anyway.
I would say in many ways, with all due my respect to our friends in the HR departments, there's been questions for a long time. But part of that is because of the way the organization treated the HR department. Look at this. We have a chief sales officer. We have a chief technology officer. We have a chief financial officer. We have a chief information officer. And then we have a director of HR.
Right.
The very structure of our business said we care about this less than we care about everything else. Now, for some of the folks listening, they're like, Joey, there's now chief people officers and chief, human resources officers. I get that, but those are the exception to the rule. In most organizations, it's still a director of HR or a manager of HR. Until we elevate that role and its status to be on par with the C-suite, if not, I would posit on par with the CEO, we're going to have problems with our employee engagement and our employee retention.
And now we mapped it out. So we mapped out the whole journey. We know the touch points. We know what we do at like each touch point. Like, what then? Like, so now we have an assessment. Like, what's the next step?
In most scenarios, Armin, we have to take a pause then, because most of the senior leaders want to vomit because they can see how bad the situation already is. Most of the folks that are responsible for individual divisions are saying, I didn't know that was happening over there. I had no idea this was happening over there. So now there's a higher level of connection and empathy to the role that everyone plays in employee experience. What I think is interesting about from my work in customer experience, for years, I would go in and do keynote speeches and workshops, and I would ask a question. It was kind of a trick question. Many speakers will do this, and they'll say, raise your hand if you're in customer service or customer experience. And you'd have the call center reps raise their hand or the account reps raise it, and no one else would raise their hand. And then I'd say, actually, everyone in this company should have their hand up right now because you're all involved in customer experience. You're all involved in customer service, whether you directly interface with a customer or not. Take that same analysis and apply it to employees. If I were to go into an organization and say, raise your hand if you're involved in employee experience, all the people in the HR department raise their hand and no one else does. And yet we know that the experience I have with my coworkers, with my immediate boss, with my direct reports, with the people in my department contributes to my experience as an employee. And not only is it the experiences that I'm having with them, but it's the experiences that they're having with me. What's it like to work with me? That's contributing to whether they like to come to work or not. When we combine those things, we quickly realize that everyone's involved in employee experience, but most people have never had any training in it. Everyone's involved in the employee interactions, but very few organizations are having conversations about how are we creating interactions and touch points that create personal and emotional connection. What are we doing to actually build this team, to strengthen our culture, to build a bond? It's not enough to say we're going to have lunch free on Friday. It's not enough to say we're going to have 2 foosball games and a video game in the corner that you can play on a break. We need to go deeper than that. And that's the opportunity that's available to every employer, regardless of industry, regardless of location in the world.
And what do you usually recommend to bring, people closer to the customer experience? Because one thing that we did for sure, which was quite successful, not sure if we have it from you, but like it's we had developers joining some of the client meetings. And the reason is very much, okay, so that they need to interact with the market on a constant basis. I suppose the larger the organization, the more difficult this is, right? And the same would mean for on the employee side, well, maybe the HR department should be slightly less relevant because the respective department or leader, they should really think about, well, how do I get the best talent? Am I, like attracting, where can I find them and so on and so forth. So like, what other kind of, what are people doing, or like how can we do it?
Well, I agree with you that it needs to be in everyone's job responsibility. But
Right.
one of the things that we need to think differently about is how do we measure that and how do we explain that to the employees? In my book, Never Lose an Employee Again, there are more than 50 case studies. And the
Wow.
last chapter is a case study of one company. It's one of my most favorite companies in the world, Lego. Okay.
Mm.
Many people listening played with Lego as a child. Some of you, like me, still play with Lego as an adult. Lego's a remarkable company. But one of the things Lego thinks very strategically about is how do we get everyone in the organization to commit to employee experience? So they actually start at the top. Now, in many large organizations, the head of HR or the head of people, part of their salary is based on the employee satisfaction scores, the employee retention scores, right? Because that's their responsibility. At Lego, 25% of every executive's salary and their pay for the year is based on the employee satisfaction and engagement scores
Mm.
across the entire organization. So you could be the person who's in charge of the factory where the Lego is produced. And part of your salary is not only how your people in the factory talk about what it's like to work in your factory, but also the people who work in the Lego store, how they score their experience. So the entire organization gets aligned around a responsibility for remarkable experiences. Now, you mentioned, well, maybe should we just do away with the HR department? Maybe someday that'll be possible, but we're nowhere close to that yet. And the reason we're not close to that yet is because the typical manager, the typical leader, has no training in people. Their skills are in the functional area they work in. We see this in sales most often. Most sales managers were really good salespeople that got promoted to become managers. They got no training in management. They got no training in running a team. But we thought, well, Armin sold really well in his division and where we had him serving. We should put him in charge of all the other salespeople because
Right.
he'll get everyone else to behave like him. This is not a recipe for success. We don't have this model in any other area of our life except the workplace, where we say, well, if you're good at it, you must be good at teaching it. That's not the way it works. Look at the people that teach on the golf tour, golfers. Most of the people that are coaches of golfers don't play on the world tour. Why? Well, because you're either really good at doing it or you're really good at helping to educate and train others to do it and teach others to do it. Rarely does the Venn diagram of those two things align. So I think we can look to our HR departments to do a better job of educating our team, supporting our team, teaching people how to create those personal and emotional connections, and building in the systems and processes to make sure it keeps getting done. Because it's not enough to just say happy birthday to the employee on their birthday.
Let me just jump in this. So is it a separate position then? Like, let's say you have the fantastic salesperson. You don't want to just like promote him because that you don't know if the person is as good in doing as or as good in teaching as in doing. But like, is it then just like a separate person in this department? Because like I think like what a lot of people realize is you still need the domain expertise, right? You still need to you still need to be able to have done it to a certain extent. So like how do you structure that, or what's the better methodology?
I think the better methodology, I agree that it's often very useful to have done it before you're asking to teach others to do it, but that's not always required, right? But it often is useful. I do think that there needs to be a separate track. There's a track for the people that are going to do it and the track for the people who are going to lead it or manage it, because they're two very different skill sets. Yes, they're operating in the same department or division, but going out and convincing a customer to buy your product is a very different skill set than getting 10 people on your sales team and motivating and supporting and encouraging them to go out and have 10 meetings where they convince people to buy the product. They're just two different skills. It's not that one is better and the other is worse. We just need to think more holistically about it. Now, where a lot of organizations, Armin, I think run into trouble is they say, well, that's not a revenue generating employee.
Mm.
then that employee isn't actually just making money for us. Not every employee has to make money directly, but every employee needs to contribute to the overall operation and experience of the organization directly. So we need to think more strategically about what we're trying to build instead of getting overly focused on, well, was their entire day revenue generating today? Because if it
Right.
wasn't, we probably need to get rid of them, which is how a lot of organizations think, which is crazy, but this is the world we live in.
And another thing that comes to mind when you said that's the world we live in is I think there's quite a lot of evidence. You can think about like, turnover rates or like, there's a lot of short-term commitment, but long-term commitment from a customer side, from an employee side. I think you have stats on this for dating as well, for pretty much everywhere is seems to be difficult. So obviously, there was this notion of the long-term kind of bond between employee employer. Uh, does it still exist? Does it still make sense? Like, is that what we can hope for when we implement methodologies, like never lose an employee again?
Well, is it possible to achieve hiring an employee and they're going to stay with you their entire career? Yes. Should that be your goal? Probably not. And here's why. The title of the book is Never Lose an Employee Again. It's not called Keep All Your Employees. There's a difference. And the difference is I want employers to not have the experience of an employee walking in saying, I'm giving you my notice, I'm quitting. That's what losing is. Losing is something that you wanted to keep going away.
Right.
That's very different than I want to keep everything. I think an analogy that more leaders should consider is what it's like to be a coach of a sports team, particularly maybe a sports team at the college or university level, where you're taking somebody who's already proven themselves to be good at the task, right? They played in high school, or junior high. They came up and you're like, oh, they're good at the task. And you know that there's somewhere where they're going to go after you if they're really good to the professional leagues, but you have them for a period of time. And during that time, your goal is to get them to produce the best possible outcomes while also taking responsibility for their personal and professional development. The best leaders in the world today run their companies like sports teams. They're constantly recruiting. They're bringing people in. They're figuring out how to assemble the pieces of the puzzle, how to hone their skills, how to train them, how to educate them, how to build them. They're setting goals that they can achieve as an organization in the next 1 to 3, 4 years, maybe. And then as team members leave, they're not angry. They're not furious that those people are leaving. They celebrate that those people have gone on to the next level. They invite them back for showcases with the new people and say, look what
Right.
you might be able to do if you perform well. This model is a model that I think more organizations should consider.
Yeah, it's interesting. And especially since now quite a lot of companies are going remote, so distributed, obviously it is a different, at least a different employee experience. I suppose that's why you're seeing turnover rates much higher in distributed teams, because, when distributed companies always saying, well, it's more difficult to build a company culture. That's what they kind of mean, right? The experience, the physical experience is not there. So how do you create this emotional experience? Like, what kind of differences do you see when you talk with or see different types of, operating systems?
Well, I think historically, when people were all under the same roof, it was easy to let human collisions and interactions with people be driving a big piece of our culture. Everybody was going to be in the break room at some point during the day. They'd talk to other people in different departments. So it'll figure itself out. When everybody's on a screen, hundreds of miles, thousands of kilometers apart from each other, suddenly it's not as easy to have those collisions. So we need to be more intentional. Two interesting examples of that. One, I talked to the leadership of a company in the property management space. So think about investing in building large properties and then managing those properties. Whenever they are looking to hire new employees for a specific role, They look at a map of where all their current employees work, and they advertise for this position in those cities and towns first before
Mm.
they advertise it more publicly. With the idea being that if I'm advertising to you and you're located in this town, or rather you're working in this town and I get another employee to work in that town, now you two can meet for lunch, you two can meet for dinner, you can potentially have some opportunities to bond with each other. So they're building little clusters globally of where their team members work, and they're letting it happen organically in the beginning and then strategically when they recruit going forward. So I thought that was a really fun example of how to do it. The other one is actually a case study from the book, Budai Media. Budai Media is based in Hungary. Well, at least their headquarters is in Hungary and their CEO lives there. They have 30 employees in 17 different time zones around the world. They are a predominantly remote distributed company. But one of the interesting things they do is to try to create personal and emotional connection with new team members from the start. So what they do, a new team member joins, and in their first week, they're going to have a phone call with everybody on the team.
Wow,
Okay, a
it's a
call
good
where
idea.
everybody comes on in the team, and they send that employee a package that clearly says on it, "Do not open until we tell you." Okay, so the package arrives. Then they all get onto the team call. They see all the little tiles, all the windows of their folks around the world, and they say, "Go ahead and open the package." And when they open the package, they pull out a mug, a coffee mug, but it doesn't have the logo of the company on it. It has photos of all of the employees on the team on the mug, including the new employee that was just hired.
Oh, wow.
And as they pull out the mug, all the other employees raise their mug in a toast to the new hire. We've now created a tangible physical artifact that you are part of the team, that you matter. You are one of us. And when the mug sits on your desk during the day while you're working remotely, you're looking at your coworkers. You see them every time you pick it up to take a drink. We can create personal and emotional connection with remote teams. We just have to think more intentionally about how to do it.
Very interesting. Yeah, the physical is very important. Like I think like retreats is another one that like, you
Yes.
know, you don't really kind of see any distributed team not doing a retreat these days. And it's obviously a very good idea. Probably twice a year seems to be right now the golden number. So Joey, you know, we came kind of full circle. Like, what's a question that I should have asked you when you talk to, you know, decision makers, you know, company leaders, you know, what keeps you awake at night? What are you thinking about? And, you know,
I love this question, Armin. I would say the thing that I am spending a lot of time thinking about right now is the convergence of customers and employees and technology, particularly as it relates to things like artificial intelligence. Now, here's what I think is interesting about artificial intelligence. When you talk to the AI experts around the world, they have very different opinions on what AI is going to be able to do, how quickly it'll be able to do it, who should be involved, what guardrails we need to put in place, etc. But almost to a T, they all agree on one thing. And that is that they think there's something that they're not going to be able to teach the AIs. And they almost all agree that the thing that they're not going to be able to teach AI to do is practice empathy. Empathy, I think, is the future of the human species. We're living in a world where we increasingly practice less empathy than we should or that we have in the past. We are increasingly polarized. We're increasingly, I'm right and you're wrong. We're increasingly, I'm smart and you're stupid. Instead of saying, what does this person know? What have they experienced? What is their worldview that I can learn from? How can I step into their shoes? I think this will be incredibly beneficial to practice more empathy with our customers. I know it will be more beneficial to practice empathy with our employees and our team members. And I would posit it's beneficial for every human on the planet to be more empathetic in how they consume information, how they consume media, how they interact with someone on the street, what they think of somebody who lives on the other side of the world, how they interact with their neighbor who lives next to them. So I'm spending a good amount of time thinking about empathy.
Powerful, very powerful, and probably means that you shouldn't have customer AI chatbots that like people are getting very frustrated that showing fake empathy in your journey. Joey, that was great. Like, where can people like follow your work apart from us? What's the best place?
Oh, Armin, I so appreciate it. My books are called Never Lose a Customer Again and Never Lose an Employee Again. They're available wherever you like to get your books. And I always like to share with folks, if you like to physically read books, we have a hardcover copy version. If you like to read on your Kindle or your Nook or your e-reader, we have an electronic version. And if you've liked the sound of my voice on our conversation today, I actually narrate the book. So you can have me read the book to
Right.
you as an audiobook. The best place to find me is on my website, joeycoleman.com. That's Joey, like a baby kangaroo or a 5-year-old. Coleman, Coleman, joeycoleman.com. You can find information about how to keep your customers, how to keep your employees, the things I'm doing with speeches and workshops and consulting engagements around the world. And I just like to conclude by saying, thanks so much for having me on the show, Armin. And thanks to everybody for listening in. I hope you came away with a few ideas of things you can do to create personal and emotional connections with the people you work with.
Joey, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Armin.